I was barely 2 bites into my grilled chicken when the peace over Lake Marin, Montana shattered. "Officers, remove him right now. He's trespassing on my shore," Karen screeched, stomping toward my campsite like a flamingo in a pink business suit. I swear, you could see ripples forming on the lake from her yelling alone. 6 police officers lined up behind her, all looking confused, while I sat there in my camping chair, flannel shirt half unbuttoned, holding 2 drumsticks like I was at a backyard barbecue, not ground zero of a neighborhood meltdown. What she didn't know, was simple. This lake has been in my family since 1952, and tonight I was done letting the HOA rewrite history. I'm Nolan Ridgway, 34 years old, born and raised in Flathead County, Montana. If you've never been here, picture a postcard. Towering pines, lake water clear enough to see the stones at the bottom, and mountains that look like they were painted by someone showing off. My family has lived on this land since 1952, long before anyone thought development meant dropping a cookie-cutter subdivision in the middle of paradise. For most of my life, our place was quiet. My parents worked hard. Dad was a wildlife officer. Mom ran a little craft store in Whitefish. I grew up learning to fix cabins, fish trout, and split firewood before sunrise. Even after moving away for college and eventually freelancing as a remote project designer, I always came back home. The lake was our heartbeat. 3 years ago, when my parents retired to Arizona, they handed me property with a simple warning. "Nolan, people try to take what you inherited. Don't ever let them." I nodded, not really believing anyone would care enough to bother. Turns out they were absolutely right. Because 2 years ago, an HOA sprouted up like a weed. The Clearwater Shores Homeowners Association. The subdivision was built on the far side of the lake, where my great-grandfather once kept horses. It wasn't my land, but everything around it felt like an invasion. Neon green lawns, houses stacked tighter than firewood, and rules for everything. And of course, every HOA needs a queen. That queen was Karen Whitmore. Imagine a storm packaged into a woman. Sharp voice, sharper heels, curly blonde hair that looked permanently electrocuted, and blazers so bright you could see her from the next county. She was the kind of person who acted like the world paused when she inhaled. For the longest time, she pretended I didn't exist. Then, slowly, she started showing up anywhere I happened to be, at the mailbox, on the shared access road. Even once near my cabin deck, claiming she was checking compliance of my property. When I reminded her I wasn't her HOA, she said, "Well, we'll see about that." I thought she was just being dramatic. I didn't realize she was preparing for something bigger. The turning point came one Thursday morning in early July. I'd spent the previous night camping near the lake shore, something I'd done since childhood. A simple setup, canvas tent, a fold-out chair, a cooler humming quietly next to me. The air smelled of spruce. The water was still as glass. Peaceful. The kind of peaceful you don't appreciate until somebody tries to ruin it. That morning, I just started breakfast, a cast-iron skillet of eggs sizzling over a fire pit, when I heard footsteps crunching across gravel. Then a voice that could strip paint off a barn. "Excuse me, you there, what do you think you're doing on this shoreline?" I didn't even turn around at first. I knew exactly who it was. Karen had one volume, nuclear, and it was aimed directly at me. She stormed up in a pink blazer bright enough to be seen from space, heels stabbing into the grass like she was punishing it. Behind her, a few HOA board members lingered awkwardly, holding clipboards as if that made them intimidating. "Morning to you too, Karen," I said calmly, flipping my eggs. She jabbed a finger at me. "This campsite is illegal. You cannot set up recreational structures on HOA lakefront." I blinked. "HOA lakefront? Karen, this shore is part of my property." "No," she snapped. "This land is subject to shared usage regulations. You didn't fill out permission forms. Therefore, you're trespassing. Trespassing on the land my grandfather had cleared by hand." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my flannel shirt. "Karen, you've overstepped every line imaginable, but this one is new. You don't own this lake. You don't own this shore. And you sure don't own me." Her nostrils flared like an irritated bull. "Well, we'll see about that. Boys, write 'em up." 2 board members stepped forward, holding their clipboards like weapons. That's when I knew this wasn't just another annoying interaction. This was the beginning of something much larger, something calculated. And Karen wasn't just trying to ruin my morning. She was trying to erase my family's claim to the lake entirely. I didn't even hear the police cruisers at first. Willowstone Lake is tucked behind a ring of old pines that swallows sound the way snow swallows footsteps. That's why I loved it. That's why my grandfather picked it back in 1952. And that's why, after a week of nonstop overtime shifts at the fabrication plant in Spokane Valley, Washington, I threw my tent, my old Coleman stove, and my kayak into the back of my truck and drove 2 hours east to breathe again. No neighbors. No engines. No HOA. Just my lake. I had barely finished frying bacon when the forest lit up blue and red like a UFO landing. Birds exploded out of the trees. My mug slipped out of my hand and splashed into the dirt. At first, I honestly thought there had been an accident. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe a drunk fisherman who needed rescue. But then I heard the voices. No commands. Step out of the tent. Weapons ready. This is the Property Owners Association. And then, cutting above them all, a voice sharp enough to slice open the night. There he is. That's him. The trespasser. I knew that voice. Karen Stanton, the self-appointed queen of Willowstone Shores. And she was dressed like she was about to host a board meeting at 11 p.m., thin pink blazer, heels that made 0 sense near a lake, and a tablet tucked under her arm like a weapon. Her short blonde hair was disheveled from the wind, but her expression? Perfectly polished fury. 3 officers swarmed past her, flashlights bouncing off the water, illuminating my tent as if I were some kind of fugitive. I stepped forward, hands up, trying not to laugh at the absurdity. Evening, officers, I said. You're on my land. I'm just camping. Nothing illegal about cooking bacon next to your own lake. One cop, the youngest, flinched like I confessed to something heinous. Sir, we received a call that you were potentially armed and refusing to leave this property. Karen jabbed a finger in my direction. Yes, I told them. He's been squatting here before. We have rules about overnight occupancy. He's endangering our residents. I blinked at her. I own the lake. No, you don't, Karen snapped. This lake is a common-use recreational amenity for the Willowstone Shores HOA. And you, she pointed again, arm trembling with adrenaline, have been warned before. I stepped closer, holding up the faded, laminated survey paper I always kept in my truck. This boundary line, I said, pointing at the map, means this lake isn't inside your HOA. It never has been. It's been in my family for 73 years. You already lost this fight 2 months ago when your lawyer tried to intimidate me. Remember? The county assessor laughed you out of the office. One of the cops raised an eyebrow at her. Karen froze, then forced a smile so fake it should have come with barcode. Well, boundaries can be disputed. Not this one, I said. Look, I get it. You don't like my truck. You don't like my campfires. You don't like anyone having fun unless you're charging a fee for it. But you don't get to weaponize the cops because I made Eskimo rays. The officers exchanged looks. Karen tried again. He's armed. He has to be. He's dangerous. Ma'am, the senior officer said, he's holding a spatula. It could be a weapon. It's a spatula. She stared at it like she wanted to outlaw cooking utensils. A silence fell, the kind that cracked something open. Finally, the senior officer sighed, rubbed his forehead, and motioned the others back. Sir, you're fine. You're not trespassing. You're not under arrest. You're on your own land. We're leaving. Karen shrieked. Actually shrieked. You can't leave. He's violating Rule 0. He shouldn't even be here. Ma'am, the officer said, patience gone. We're done. They walked away. Karen stood there, trembling in the flashing lights, staring at me like I had personally ruined her HOA calendar for the year. Fine, she hissed. If the police won't stop you, the HOA will. She stormed off into the night, and as the cruisers pulled away, I felt it, that quiet, heavy pressure in the gut. This wasn't over. Not even close. I wish I could tell you things calmed down after that first ridiculous encounter. But if anything, they got worse. Because the next morning, before the sun even cleared the ridgeline above Lake Silvana, I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel again. Except this time, it wasn't the sheriff. It was them, the HOA board. 3 SUVs lined up on my lakeside trail, like they were conducting some kind of government raid. And there she was, leading the charge like a CEO marching into a hostile takeover. Karen Whitmore, in a bright magenta blazer, so loud it nearly reflected off the lake. She stepped out her SUV with a clipboard tucked against her hip, sunglasses on despite the early hour, her hair fixed in that short, controlled messy blonde style that somehow still looked aggressive. Good morning, camper, she said, emphasizing the word like it was an insult. We need to discuss your situation. I took a sip of my coffee and leaned against the post of my dock. My situation? I said, Lady, I live here. Not legally, she snapped. This lake belongs to Willow Ridge HOA. I actually laughed. Not sarcastically. Not mockingly. A real laugh. It was either that or let my blood pressure spike. Ma'am, I said, pulling my folded deed packet from my back pocket. My family bought this land in 1952. The entire southern bank, the inlet, the woods behind it. All mine, not yours. She waved her hand dismissively. We believe your deed is outdated. I believe your blazer is fluorescent enough to signal aircraft, I said. But here we are. That's when another board member, a tall guy in khakis and boat shoes, stepped forward. We need you off this property, he said. Immediately. I'm not going anywhere. Karen leaned close, face inches from mine. You are trespassing on HOA recreational land. We can fine you. We can remove you. And if needed, we can file a civil order. I held her stare. You can call whoever you want. But I'm not leaving my own land. Her jaw twitched. You're making this difficult. You're making this delusional. And then, like she rehearsed it, Karen pulled a laminated map from her clipboard and flipped it open. It showed the lake, but shaded entirely in HOA blue. This was approved at our last meeting, she said. The lake, your lake, is now under HOA jurisdiction due to community access. Community access? I repeated. You mean the illegal trail your builders carved across my woods without permission? She didn't flinch. Oh, that trail is staying, she said. And starting this weekend, we're hosting a community kayak festival. I nearly spilled my coffee. You're not serious. Oh, I'm very serious, she said. And since you insist on illegally camping here, the HOA will be assigning volunteers to monitor your activities. Monitor me? For safety, she smiled. It wasn't a smile. It was a declaration. She wasn't just challenging my rights. She was announcing a campaign. A war over water. A war I didn't start. But after this, I was sure as hell going to finish. I didn't sleep that night. After the cops finally cleared out and Megan strutted back to her SUV like she had personally conquered a small country, the lake went quiet again, but not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like something is watching you. I sat inside my cabin with every light off, just staring out through the window toward the tree line where the HOA board had disappeared earlier. My phone buzzed nonstop with notices from county offices, code enforcement, zoning review, all complaints filed by Willow Crest Lakeside Association. Every single one came in between 9:04 p.m. and 9:27 p.m. They didn't even pretend to be subtle. These people work fast, I muttered, scrolling through the mess. Noise complaint, illegal camping, unauthorized fire pit, unapproved watercraft storage, which was just my kayak tied to a post. They were throwing every rule they had at me, even though I wasn't part of their HOA. I had documents from 1952, recorded and stamped, proving my land was never annexed into anything. But Megan didn't care about paperwork. She cared about control. I stepped onto the porch, cold night air brushing against my arms, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I scanned the woods and froze. Rusted tire tracks. Fresh ones. Deep, heavy, leading right down the slope toward my lake. Not from the police cruisers. They never drove down here. These were wider. Industrial. Something big had come through earlier. Then I noticed a chain-link gate at the far end of my shore. Bent. Warped. Like someone tried ramming something through it. A truck? A small loader? Were they trying to get onto my land even before the cops showed up? I followed the tracks down to the water. They stopped inches from the lake, mud carved out by spinning tires. My heart thudded. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were measuring my land, testing access points, seeing how close they could get. And then I remembered the conversation Megan had earlier with the officers. How she kept insisting, this entire lake is part Willow Crest, all of it, even the peninsula he thinks is his. She wasn't just trying to kick me off. She was planning to take it. The next morning, I drove straight to the county recorder's office in Kalispell. They knew me by name by the time I walked out. I had every deed, plat map, survey report, aerial archive, and even a 1953 newspaper clipping about my grandfather building this lake cabin with his own two hands. My land was ironclad, but HOAs don't play by logic. They play by pressure. By the time I returned home, 3 new violation notices were taped to my mailbox. One of them said I had 48 hours to remove my cabin, because it did not meet architectural compatibility standards. Compatibility with what? My nearest neighbor was 1,200 feet away. I ripped the paper in half. That's when I heard shouting, Megan's unmistakable voice, coming from the paved path above the lake. I looked up. She was directing 2 HOA board members with clipboards like they were soldiers in her personal militia. And mark everything from that tree cluster to the bend in the shoreline, she barked. The board vote is tomorrow. Once it passes, this lake becomes a shared access zone. You can't stop us. One of the men hesitated, but he hasn't agreed to membership. He doesn't have to agree, she snapped. We'll just file a land reassessment. Once the zoning board sees a development plan, they'll give it to us. My stomach dropped. They weren't playing games. They were preparing a takeover. I stepped forward, voice steady. You step 1 foot onto my shoreline, and I'm filing my own paperwork. Federal paperwork. Megan turned slowly, smiling like a fox catching you in its teeth. Oh, Dylan, she said sweetly. You don't have the power you think you do. But I wasn't scared anymore, because while she spent her night building a case against me, I had found something buried deep in the old survey archives. Something the HOA really didn't want exposed. Something that would flip this entire war on its head. And for the first time since this mess started, I smiled. They wanted a battle? They were about to get one. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared of the HOA. Not because the cops showed up twice. But because of what I overheard. See, even though they thought I had packed up and gone home, I stayed. In my truck, parked on the ridge above the lake, watching their headlights move like fireflies around the shoreline. Everyone assumes HOA meetings happen in conference rooms or fancy clubhouses. Not Willowcrest HOA. These people held midnight strategy huddles on my lakefront, like they were planning a takeover of a small country. From my truck, window cracked open, I heard Karen's voice echoing across the water, sharp, irritated, and way too stressed for someone who kept claiming I was one insignificant trespasser. He can't be here. I already filed the easement transfer. He should have been off this land months ago. Then a man, deep voice, one of her board members, answered. Well, apparently he owns it. The deed checks out. No, he doesn't, she snapped. His father didn't file the mineral survey. That loophole is our ticket. The county already approved the acquisition if we present full usage control. We just need him gone long enough to. She stopped. A flashlight beam swept in my direction. I ducked. She didn't see me. But I saw something else, something that made my stomach twist. A big folder tucked under her arm. I recognized the county appraisal logo. That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to remove me from their lake. They were trying to take the lake from me. And tonight wasn't about harassment. It was about buying time. The next morning, I drove straight to the Flathead County Recorder's office. The lady behind the glass looked up from her computer. Morning. How can I help you? I slid my father's deed across the counter. I need every document filed against this parcel since 1952, especially anything in the last 12 months. She whistled. Going big today, huh? Give me a few. 5 minutes later, she returned with a stack of printouts an inch thick. I didn't even flip far before my blood pressure spiked. Unauthorized land use petition. Filed by Willowcrest HOA. Purpose: lakeside beautification and recreational development. Recommended action: county review pending. Beautification? Development? They were trying to turn my lakefront into their HOA-cleared community waterfront. Then I found the Real bomb. Emergency easement transfer proposal. Filed by Megan Stetson. She had submitted it 6 weeks ago. Without my knowledge. Without my signature. Without any legal basis. The only reason it hadn't gone through yet was because the county wanted proof my family no longer maintained the land. And guess how they intended to prove that? By arresting me for trespassing. My hand shook. I walked back to the counter. Ma'am, do I have the right to challenge these? She smiled politely. You sure do. And if these were filed without your authorization, that's a violation of state property law. A violation. A crime. A weapon for me. I drove straight back home, chest tight with anger and adrenaline. When I reached the lake, Karen was already there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on even though it was cloudy, acting like this was her domain. She waved her hand like she was greeting a neighbor she hated but had to pretend to like. Well, look who's back. Ready to cooperate today, sweetheart? Sweetheart. I stepped out of my truck, and held up the county documents. You filed illegal petitions to seize my lake. You lied to the county. You sent cops after me to make the property look abandoned. Her smile froze. You weren't supposed to see that. Yeah, I said, folded my arms. I figured. She inhaled sharply. Then she dropped the composure. You don't understand. This lake is worth millions. Willow Crest needs its expansion. Our property values depend on it. And my family history depends on this land. I cut in. She stared at me like I wasn't a person, just an obstacle. Then she whispered, barely audible, you should have sold when you had the chance. There it was. Her motive, her mistake, her confession. And it was all recorded, because tucked into my shirt pocket was a little black audio device, one my dad used during bridge inspections. Right now, it held every word she just said. I kept my expression calm, but inside, the war had officially begun. By sunrise the next morning, I drove down to Clark County Zoning, an environmental office with a stack of evidence, so thick it felt like carrying a phone book. I hadn't slept. Between the adrenaline, anger, and the glow of the lake reflecting through my window all night, my mind spun with one thought. If I don't stop them now, they'll take everything. The lobby of the county building smelled like burnt coffee and cheap paper. A line of people waited at the clerk windows, contractors, homeowners, two guys arguing over a septic permit. I stood there gripping my binder, heart thudding, replaying Karen's screaming voice from the night before. Arrest him. He's trespassing on our lake. When my turn came, I stepped up to the counter. Morning. The clerk said without looking up. What violation are you reporting? I laid the binder down gently, then opened it like a lawyer presenting a murder weapon. Illegal easements, fraudulent lake boundary reports, HOA criminal trespassing, environmental contamination, and destruction of private shoreline. She blinked twice. Oh, one moment. She disappeared through a door, so fast it looked like she teleported. 2 minutes later, a tall man in a white shirt and county badge stepped out. The department head, Chief Zoning Officer Mark Laird. "You're the one who called last night?" he asked. "Yes, sir. You said an HOA was, what was the phrase, trying to erase your lake?" "That's correct." I slid the drone photos toward him. "And here's proof." He leaned in and froze. The photos from last night, the illegal retaining walls, the bulldozed shoreline, the stolen property signs tossed behind a gazebo, hit him like a slap. "Is this Driftwood Point HOA?" "Yup." He rubbed his forehead. "We've had complaints about them for years, but nothing this concrete." I pointed at a document, because every complaint mysteriously disappeared. They had someone inside this building deleting them. He looked up sharply. "You're accusing a county employee?" "Yes. Her name is listed on every erase file. The same signature, the same login time, and she shows up in HOA meeting minutes." It took him 5 seconds to process. Then he stood. "Follow me." We walked into his office, where he called 2 departments at once, Environmental Protection and County Legal Affairs. Within minutes, 3 officials were flipping through my binder with expressions of people discovering a ticking time bomb under their desk. "This is extensive," Legal Affairs said quietly. "Criminally extensive," the environmental agent corrected. Then something happened I never expected. They asked me to take them to the lake. Within 35 minutes, 3 county SUVs, 2 environmental enforcement trucks, and an unmarked legal vehicle were following my truck down the road toward my property. My pulse hammered, not from fear, but because I knew what was coming. As we turned the final bend, Karen and 2 HOA board members were already waiting near the gazebo. Karen had her arms folded, wearing an eye-searing neon pink blazer, like she was auditioning for a hostile takeover commercial. She saw the convoy behind me and laughed out loud. "Oh, please. What is this? Your little support group? County officers don't answer to you." The lead zoning officer stepped out of his SUV. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we're here because of your HOA's violations." Her smirk evaporated. "My HOA? No, 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 no. You must be mistaken. He's the problem." She pointed at me with her long acrylic nails. "He trespassed. He camped illegally. He—" "Ma'am," the officer repeated. "He owns the lake." Karen blinked. "Twice. W what?" "And we have reason to believe your association intentionally altered public documents," the legal agent added. What does that mean?" Her voice cracked. "It means," the environmental officer said, stepping forward. "If any of these allegations are confirmed, your HOA is subject to immediate suspension." "No, no, 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 and no," she stammered, looking around as if someone would bail her out. "You can't suspend an entire HOA." "Oh, we can," the officer replied. "And we have—" He pulled a sealed envelope from his folder and handed it to her. Karen tore it open and screamed, "You can't do this. We're a registered HOA. We have rights." "Not when you break the law," the officer said. "Not when you falsify land boundaries. Not when you trespass. And not when you corrupt county records." Her board members looked like their souls left their bodies. One whispered, "Karen, what did you do?" She spun on him. I did what any HOA president would do. I protected property values. Ma'am," the chief zoning officer said, "your HOA no longer exists as of this moment. All operations are frozen. All enforcement halted. All meetings banned. You're required to vacate the common area immediately." Karen let out a high-pitched, guttural scream I didn't know humans were capable of. You did this." She pointed at me again. "You just wiped out an entire community." I looked her dead in the eyes. "No," I said quietly. "You wiped out yourself. I just showed the county where to look." Karen lunged forward like she wanted to shove me, but a police officer stepped between us. "Ma'am," he warned, "don't." She stopped, chest heaving, face red as a traffic cone. And in that moment, watching her realization sink in, I finally felt the weight lift off my chest. The HOA was gone, but part of me sensed this was just the beginning. And I was right, because as the county officials inspected the shoreline, the bulldozed trails, the destroyed vegetation, they uncovered something far worse than boundary fraud. Something that explained why the HOA was so desperate to push into my land. Something Karen never wanted revealed. But that is for the next part. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Not because I was nervous, but because I was angry. I sat on the dock of my lake, legs crossed, landed beside me, watching the ripples move under the moonlight. This lake had been my family's pride since 1952, and somehow an HOA had tried to erase that with paperwork, police intimidation, and the arrogance of a woman who treated authority like a designer accessory. The next morning, I drove to the county building in Meridian, Idaho, and every step through those glass doors felt like I was reclaiming something. Inside the hearing room, Karen sat at the far table in a hot pink blazer, arms crossed, smirk locked on her face like she'd already won. Her short blonde hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Behind her, half the HOA board sat whispering like a pack of vultures. Across the room, a few residents who had recently left the HOA sat together, heads down, hoping today would finally end the nightmare. I took my seat, placed my folder of evidence on the table, and looked directly at her. She glared back like I'd personally offended her existence. The county judge walked in. Everyone stood. "Let's proceed," he said, flipping open the case file. "This hearing concerns property rights, unlawful harassment, misuse of police resources, and potential HOA boundary fraud." Karen's smirk cracked. Just slightly, but I saw it. The judge gestured. "Mr. Graves, you may begin." I stood slowly, cleared my throat, and spoke in a calm voice that carried across the room. "Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, I went camping on my lake, my family's lake, land we've owned for over 70 years. Within 2 hours, Mrs. Whitmore here called the police claiming I was trespassing. As you'll see," I opened the folder. "I have the full deed from 1952, every map revision, every tax receipt, and a signed affidavit from the county surveyor confirming the HOA never legally had authority over my land." I turned the documents around so the judge could see. Karen shot up from her chair. "That's a lie. That surveyor only said that because he's friends with him." She jabbed a finger toward me, like she was trying to stab me from across the room. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said sharply, "one more interruption and you'll be escorted out." She fell back in her seat, jaw tight, eyes burning holes through me. I continued. "Additionally, I have security footage of the HOA board walking onto my property at 3 a.m, taking measurements, marking trees, and placing stakes as if they owned the shoreline. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated effort to absorb my land into their subdivision." A whisper rippled across the room. The judge held out his hand. "Footage, please." I handed over USB. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. When the video played, the room fell silent. There she was, Karen, holding a clipboard, pointing at my dock, telling 2 board members, Once we annex this part, he'll have no choice but to follow our rules." Her voice echoed across the speakers. The judge stared at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, is that you?" She hesitated. "Yes," she finally muttered. "But—" No further explanation needed. The temperature in the room practically dropped. I wasn't even halfway through. I pulled out one more document. "And finally, Your Honor, I have a notarized letter from the original developer stating the HOA boundaries were never meant to extend past Willow Creek Road. The lake was explicitly excluded." Karen slammed both palms on the table. "He paid them off. This is rigged." The judge turned red. "Bailiff." Two officers stepped forward. Karen froze. Her board members quietly separated themselves from her like she was contagious. The judge lifted his gavel. "Effective immediately, the Willow Crest HOA is dissolved pending investigation. All board members are removed from authority. Mrs. Whitmore, you are placed under temporary restriction from entering Mr. Gray's property or contacting him. The misuse of police resources and trespassing charges will be reviewed by the county prosecutor." The gavel hit the table. Crack! Karen's mouth hung open. Her world, her power, her little kingdom she built out of fear and paperwork. Gone. Just like that. She looked at me with pure disbelief, whispering, How did you beat us?" I leaned in slightly and said quietly, so only she could hear, "You shouldn't have messed with a man who knows how to read a map." The officers approached. Karen backed away, shaking her head, chest heaving. "This isn't over." "Oh, it definitely is," an officer said. As they escorted her out, she stared at me over her shoulder, eyes wide, face pale, like she finally realized the truth. She had never controlled me. She had only dug her own grave. The HOA board slunk out behind her, silent and defeated. Residents approached me afterward, some thanking me, some apologizing for not standing up sooner. I walked out of the county building into the bright Idaho sun, a breeze coming off the foothills, and I felt every ounce of tension that had been choking me for weeks just lift. I drove home, parked by my lake, stepped out onto the dock again, and said to myself, it's finally over. Except later that evening, as I sat by the fire pit watching the orange sky fade into twilight, a single envelope appeared at the end of my driveway. No stamp, no markings. Inside it was one sentence. "You may have won today, but you didn't destroy everything." There was no signature, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Karen wasn't done. Not yet, but neither was I. And if she wanted a war, she'd just learned whose lake she was standing on. So that's how one night of peaceful camping on my own lake turned into a full-blown investigation, a courtroom collapse, and the end of an HOA that thought it owned the world. In the end, the lake stayed mine. The truth came out, and every scare tactic they tried only pushed them closer to their own downfall. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-world HOA drama, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more people, and we've got plenty more wild stories coming your way.